All right, Ryan, today it's your top 5 Christian bands.
Christian bands.
Yep.
Because I don't listen to anything but Christian
Same.
music. Never have listened to anything.
You could look at my
but that.
CD collection, and it's all from the Christian bookstore.
That's probably true for my actual CD collection.
How old are we? We have CD collections.
I have audio cassettes at home, so
I
that
do too.
I think they're actually my brothers.
You could say
I bought
vinyl
from
records, but that's cool.
them. No,
The kids again.
I don't have vinyl records.
But I actually have vinyl records from like when they were originally cool.
Yeah, like the original vinyl. But
Yeah.
okay, top 5 Christian bands. I have 5, and they will not be in.
Yeah, that's usually how many there are in a top 5.
No, I have 6, but I'm going to do 5 and then a bonus one. But yeah, so Third Day is definitely number 1. That's
Yep.
my favorite Christian band. Unfortunately, they've retired as a group.
Oh, have
but
they?
yeah, so they've released their last group. So I'm hoping they kind of do that. You know, the bands come back together and they do that.
And let's keep score. Have you
Reunion.
seen them in concert?
Yes.
I have too. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
I would love to see more times, but I only saw them once, so it's
Okay.
disappointing. But and then the other 4 would be bands that are not in any order. I
Okay.
can't give you top. So
Oh, so Third Day is
they're number 1.
number
the
1.
rest are all number
Couldn't
2.
make them number 3 to go with Third Day, but that's
No,
fine. Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, not at all. Have you ever heard of the band I Am They?
I have not.
Oh, you might actually really enjoy
They
it.
sound grammatically confused.
Oh, very much. But they're really cool. And then Zach Williams' band, they're really cool. I like them. Audio Adrenaline. And then I have to add Striper on that list.
Striper.
Striper.
Have you seen Striper in concert?
I have not seen Striper
have.
in concert. Yes. No, for all those people out there, if you could ever get a video of one of their concerts, I would totally.
It was
go for it.
It was late period, but they did come out in the yellow and black.
Yes.
It was
Black
at Cornerstone
Attack.
one year.
That was great.
And they're not exactly the kind of metal that I like, but man, they're good.
And I'm
They
not-
are good.
I'm not a metal guy. Like
Excellent
I'm not
musicians.
a huge metal guy, but the lyrics that they wrote were just
Yeah.
like, I mean, come on, they're just like so on point and so just right in your face that it was just like okay. And then like top, I got to put it out there, like that's 6, but you know, Petra.
Yes,
Like,
I mean you got to have Petra.
you got to have
there.
Petra in there for all their different things. And I did see them in concert.
Where?
I was in Saskatoon.
Oh, you didn't live around here. I was going to say they were at Alumni Hall at University of Western Ontario.
know what that is.
Years ago. Kieran knows what it is. That's his school.
Yeah, I don't
Big
know what that
concert.
is.
Big concert. And then I saw them with Whiteheart in Detroit at the Fox Theater, and that was an amazing bill. Actually, a bit more of a fan of Whiteheart than I was of Petra, but to see those two bands at the height of their prowess,
Yeah, I don't
shall we
think I
say,
saw them at
was
their
really
height.
something.
Because I saw them in concert with DC Talk.
Oh wow!
Like now, there was a fun band too. So they
Decent Christian Talk.
Decent Christian Talk. Yeah, there was a whole. That's a whole different world of.
Don't even get me
Christian
started
music.
on how awful I think that is. Although I did interview Toby Mac once.
Really?
I did. Yeah,
And
I
what
was
did he
working
say?
in the press tent at a music festival, and I interviewed him.
He seems like a nice guy. I've never met him, but he seems like a nice guy.
He did for the 30 minutes that I knew him. He was wonderful. Also doing an interview, so it behooves him to act professionally and nicely. All right, there you have it. Ryan's top 5
Top 5
Christian
Christian
bands.
bands. Go check them out. So today we're looking at Hebrews chapter 3, verses 12 to 15, which is all about encouraging one another. But I did find this to be very encouraging because it wasn't just something you just say to help people feel better about themselves. Like there was some meat in here and help us to understand true biblical encouragement rather than just pleasantries that you say to people and try to
The
flatter
the
them.
whole subject of encouragement has been really diluted and sort of simplified into giving someone a pat on the back and saying, "Great job, way to go." And that is definitely part of encouragement, but especially as followers of Jesus, encouragement has more aspects to it, right? And it's a deeper thing of not just saying well done, but also at times saying you don't seem to be doing so well, and then stepping in to help in a friendly way, in an encouraging way, so that person can, perhaps be given the opportunity to see that they're not going in the right direction and have an opportunity to repent, which means to, be going in one direction and turning to another direction. So, getting a sort of fuller picture of what encouragement is.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned was this for our church, but a little bit from the culture that we're in is these 5 barriers that for our church is difficult, and it's been cool to see our church come, because when I joined the church, there was a lot of people that said, yeah, our church struggles with encouragement, and yet
Yeah, that's right.
I felt more encouraged in this church than a lot of ministries I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
And so there's been some growth and some development in that. So it's really cool to see a church go, okay, we're not strong in this. Let's grow in that. So I've been blessed by that.
That timing actually it makes sense because that was in the spring of 2018 where this was kind of brought to our attention that we were weak in encouragement, and so we with that in mind set out to change some of those things. And I know, like, one very practical thing that I did, because I love my Google Calendar, is I put a slug, an all-day event in the top of my calendar for every Sunday that just said encourage people. So then I'd remember as I check before I come to church on Sunday morning, yes, remember. Not that I wasn't doing it before, but just to have it top of mind, to look for people to encourage, and then sending text messages and things like that.
And not just in like, oh, your hair is really nice today. Not encouragement that way, but true biblical encouragement. So those 5 barriers, which were really cool. One, the first one said we don't know how to encourage, which is very, I find it funny because I'm like, well, everybody knows how to encourage, but no, we don't.
Yeah.
Like,
now, if you weren't trained to do that in your childhood, if that wasn't modeled for you, and that is the case for a lot of people who attend this church, they just didn't receive a lot of encouragement in their formative years, and therefore it does not come naturally to them. Like, it's not something that was modeled for them, so it's not something that comes naturally to them. So that's a significant barrier.
And then number 2, we might think that encouragement might be a deterrent to someone. We don't want to let someone to be built up too much so they could fall into pride.
Yeah, there's a real deep thinking here, or a deep I'm not sure exactly what it is. There's this thing about false humility that we do really, really, really well. That it actually ends up being a way to not put yourself out there because, for me to step up, I mean, that'd just be pride,
Yeah.
To bring any visibility to myself or any attention to myself, that would be pride. Therefore, I can't do anything that will bring any visibility or attention to myself, even if that's what God is calling me to do. It would be pride, so I can't. So that can be a barrier as well.
Yeah, and then we're afraid to encourage.
Yeah. That's another sort of characteristic of people that come to our church. And these are not criticisms; these are observations. They're things that we need to work on.
And this is life to move us forward.
But we're not terribly expressive, and we don't ever expect to get to the point where, that you would see in, say, in a charismatic church where there's a lot of physical movement, there's a lot of, verbalizing emotion. We do need to come in that direction. We'll never probably get to the point where everybody's doing that. However, really, a lot of people raised here to suppress emotion and basically see emotion as a inherently negative, and so any expression of it was just not good.
And is that like a pushed extreme of like children should be seen and not heard, and like people should be never heard? Like, is that part of it?
Part of it is we don't have time for the emotional life. You're just supposed to be working hard all the time, so you can't slow down to rest or be depressed or really to celebrate either. It's the positive emotion that doesn't get, because we know, because we preach, but then we also mix and mingle with people, and we know that they are feeling deep things, and we know that they're being discipled, and there's a lot of growth in their spiritual life, but you wouldn't know that on a Sunday morning. Even during our singing, right? It has come a ways from where it was, but people still feel very, very bound up when it comes to expressing visual expression of emotion.
Yeah.
So that's just things that we need to keep working on.
And then number 4, we're too proud to encourage.
Yeah, 4 and 5 were both more negative takes on it, and maybe a little bit more generally applied as well, because if we encourage someone, and if we do so publicly, then the people's eyes will be drawn to them, and they'll be, hey, yeah, they are a pretty good person. They are pretty good at whatever it is. And then we might have that, now the attention's not on me, and I've given the attention over the spotlight over to that person. And so we might find, maybe if we want to observe in ourselves, sometimes that might happen as well. We're a little bit jealous of the attention that we're giving to someone else.
And then number 5, we're too critical to encourage. I love this one. This one was fun to listen to.
That's a pretty deep one, I think, in our culture, in the way that a lot of people were raised. It goes along with the first one, right? You didn't receive encouragement, but this is maybe the negative, more negative part of that is that not only was there not encouragement, but there was constant criticism. And so we've kind of been trained to, even if you do see something good, you're supposed to also make sure that you find anything that's not good about it.
Yeah.
Something that you can still criticize, which is tough because it takes away your.
It takes away the blessing that you're giving to people.
And your motivation goes away, right? Because, it's true. You can look at something and nothing's going to be perfect. And so you can always find something to be critical about. And too many people were raised in those types of homes where it didn't matter the good stuff that they did. It was the negative things that their parents could find that the parents would pick on. And then it goes back to, some of these other ones that maybe parents thinking that, well, if I point out the good things that they're doing, well, they're going to slack off on all these other things that we need them to do. And that these are they're kind of sick mentalities, but they exist and we need to work on them.
And it's one of those things where you can't change the past. Yeah. But let's move forward to
and there's a new generation before us, right, that we can change our practices with.
The next part that you really touched on, for me at least anyways, it stood out for me was this idea for encouragement, because the Bible says that we should encourage each other not get together. We need to be together. And Hebrews tells us that, that we need to be together, continue to be, don't fall away from it, continue to we take that we could take that so legalistically and say, well, you always have to meet together, you always have to get together. But I love that you gave practical, real examples about, like, well, that's not true. We don't hold on to that for every situation. Yeah. So it's not this legalistic thing that we have to follow. It's a direct command from God, and if we don't do it, then we're absolutely sinning. But yet then you mentioned a couple of things like, okay, well, if it's snowing and there's this huge storm.
Yeah. We've already done that, right?
Yeah. So I really appreciate that whole idea of fighting it, because right now I think there's this tension in our world of churches and people and saying, well, this is a biblical man, we have to meet together, we're fighting for our freedom and our rights, and it's just... And
the conversation, the rhetoric that's going on between church leaders, churches, and other church leaders and their churches is heated right now. And there are some who are using those verses in Hebrews. They would say they're not using them as an absolute, but if you look at the language they're using, they seem to be using it as an absolute. It's like, no, we have to do this. God commands us to meet, and we have to meet. It's like, okay, so I started what turned out to be a really interesting conversation by putting out a scenario and saying, if you believe these verses are absolute, does that mean that you would continue to meet, even if there was a virus that had a 99% fatality rate? And then everybody wants to back off and say, well, no, we're not saying that it's absolute. And to that I just say, you are acting like it's absolute, and you are speaking like it's absolute. So I want to know how absolute you think it is. And that's not just to sort of create a gotcha scenario. I want to know what you're, like, how do you judge this? Where's the percentage? As if it's 50% fatal, if it's 75% fatal? Like, where's your standard? Because if your standard is not absolute, that means it's something less than absolute, obviously.
And then it bothers me because if they go down that route, it really insults other people. There are people that are, number one, physically not able to get out to meet together. Then they're just sitting by physically not being able to. That's wrong. People in other countries that it's illegal for them to meet together, so them fighting and struggling, and they still find ways to do that, but they're not meeting together all the time, and there's times they're going to take breaks.
Or in large groups. Like what's implied in a lot of these conversations, too, is that the entire church, whether you have 50 people or 1,000 people, it's not real worship unless we're all together.
Yeah.
I just don't find a biblical warrant for that. I also don't go to the opposite extreme and just say, well, as long as you have 2 or 3 people, that's church, and you just keep doing that. Like in between there is where we're, those are the extreme ends of that argument, and neither one is the fullness of it. So.
But that's why, to me, it's an encouragement to keep meeting together, and it's an individual thing. It's like, don't fall away. Make sure yourself, you get in there. Make sure you're not falling away from doing that, and so that all these other things can fall into place if you keep that practice.
In the case of weather or natural disaster, if you're going to take this as sort of a legalistic, we must meet because God commands it, then, I guess you take your family out in these very dangerous conditions, possibly die on the way there. But if you believe that that's legalistically required, then I guess you just count that as being faithful to God.
Yeah, and if you die, well, that was God's intent,
but nobody seems to treat it that way. But now it's become a hammer in the hands of some.
If they're going to push it that way, then that's where they got to go. So, well, we'll leave that. We'll go from there. So the other thing too, then, is what stood out to me was this idea of biblical encouragement. And it was funny you mentioned the idea of, if we take the definition of encouragement, we get rid of that, that's kind of like, let's not take that because, but then you're like, well, I like words. And so it was kind of funny. I was like, well, I kind of like looking up definition of words, but I struggle sometimes with words, so it's good that I do that. But you talk about this idea of biblical encouragement, to exhort one another, Hebrews 3:13, to tell us but to exhort doesn't necessarily mean just flattery and build people up that way and say, oh, you're so great at this, you're so good at that. But it's also it's speaking truth into their life, and so that can be on the positive note and encouraging them and saying what you're doing here is really good. But it's also speaking truth in, maybe there's some things we need to work on together and journey with
in a confronting way. Sometimes that can be encouragement as well.
But you can't do that confronting with somebody if you're not coming alongside of them and being close to them. I mean, I could walk up to a stranger and be like, you know what you need to work on. Great, that's not going to help them. That's just going to make them either feel bad or go, I'm crazy. But with somebody that I'm close to, and I hope that there's people out there that continue to want to do that for me and want to come up close and personal, get in my life and be like, Ryan, you're doing great here, but there's some things. And it really made me think of the whole Nathan story and Nathan and David and walk alongside that. So that whole idea of biblical encouragement.
And then you actually have to let people close enough to you to speak those things, right? And we're not generally good with that sort of vulnerability or revealing that much about ourselves so that someone could make a criticism about it. And that was another point about we can deceive people, and in a sense we mostly do deceive people on social media, for example, because we don't put pictures of our bad day on there usually it's just we're doing this as a family, great, spending so much time with each other, it's our anniversary, and it encourages us to be a little bit deceptive. And then then that takes away some of the opportunities that we might have to encourage each other, because you think, oh well, everything's going well there, I guess I can just give them a thumbs up and go find somebody who has problems.
Yeah.
Which is nobody if you look on Facebook.
Which is nobody if you look on Facebook. The only problems you find on Facebook are people like, I really did this humorous bad cake. Like, it's so bad that it becomes humorous, or you cook something, it was just, you burnt it or whatever. So those situations that are so humorously bad, but just the regular struggles in life, we do not share those on Facebook. And
nobody's
on
like,
social media.
I lost it on my kids again. Hashtag great parent.
Why don't we see those?
Maybe we should.
Maybe we shouldn't. I don't know. Maybe we should.
We could have been like, we just had our third COVID family meltdown. Everyone, please comment. How many COVID meltdowns have you had?
Maybe. I mean, it's truth and love, right? Like share it out there. I don't know, but that could be fun. And then one of the things near the end of talking about this was that Larry Crabb, he did this great quote. I don't know if you have the quote
read
there,
it,
but
he said, relationships must be regarded as opportunities to promote a fuller appreciation of Christ through mirroring Christ to one another, treating each other as valuable bearers of the image of God, and accepting one another in spite of shortcomings. Too often we view relationships as nothing more than a chance to feel comfortable and to experience a measure of fulfillment.
Yeah, and that just speaks volumes to me about how, again, we need to be close to people and we need to let people close to us. And this is a daily walking beside each other, a daily being a part of that.
But it's also like it's sort of you want to give people permission when you're together and you need to socialize, and that's all good, but talk about the tough stuff.
Yeah.
If we as believers, especially as people who are in the same family in a church, are not going to talk to each other about the tough stuff, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
And so that's part of encouragement as well. Get together, play some games, watch a movie, whatever. But there's got to be a point where you're asking questions like, what's God doing in your life? Or is there any way that I can pray for you? Or what are you struggling with right now? Or maybe that happens over coffee in more of a private setting. But that needs to happen.
That's the opposite of social media. Like social media put out the positive thing. Those negatives, if we put them out there or whatever, or say, I've had this big meltdown. But that's where those conversations happen. Individually, safe. You're not putting out to the whole world that you're this horrible parent, but talking to your close friends, talking to your close family, and saying, you know what, like we've really had this breakdown, and we don't know what to do, or we don't know what the next step.
So there's the close enough that I'm close enough to you to ask, to say, how are things going with this area of your life? But there's the close enough where you can say to me, I am just struggling with my kids right now. Like, please listen to me and give me some help. Like, there needs to be that kind of closeness. That's what we need to be cultivating among us as a church family, and then, you know, reaching outside of that as well. But primarily, that's what it's talking about here, is between fellow believers. Yeah, we just keep coming back to this idea. We got to ask each other the tough questions. That was, you know, the main service, I would say, that my friend and mentor who recently passed away, Arthur, provided for me, was at that monthly breakfast. He had this list of questions that he was going to ask me, and that I needed to answer truthfully. So helpful.
And you knew that you weren't going to get away with not answering.
I knew that,
honestly,
and I also knew that it would be followed up with both advice and encouragement. And it was, I wasn't going to get a pass on anything, but I also wasn't going to be condemned for anything. I'd be confronted.
And I think that's where the world falters when we talk about encouragement, is that it all has to be this positive side where I'm going to feel good about myself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to feel good about myself when someone confronts me and I'm able to deal with it. Like, that's even going to be better in the long run, but that's hard to get to. So for those people that don't have, you know, someone, a mentor that maybe that they're close to, or even friends right now, you know, some people are struggling to find real deep connections. Those don't happen overnight. Those do take time to cultivate. You need to spend time together, and maybe that means sitting down and playing Monopoly. Maybe that means sitting down and just having coffee. Maybe that just means, I don't know, building a shed together or something. But all that takes time. But there has to be the intention, you know, in all of us, and especially as believers. I think that we need to put this, like you say, on the top of your calendar. Encourage, and to help each other. But
there you go.
Take the time to do that.
Encourage one another. We hope that you are finding this helpful, and if you'd like to share this with some other people, we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube and Facebook. Is there anything I'm missing?
Get the YouTubes and the Facebooks
and crank them up
and put it on there. But yeah, share it with your friends. That would be great. And if you have any questions for us to discuss, we would love to hear from you. And
we prefer snail mail.
Snail mail, pigeon post. What's the other ones?
Pony Express.
Pony Express. What's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't just no, I can't even find the word. Shoot. Things to say. Yeah. What is that word I'm looking for? Oh, it's like
filler?
No. A pleasantry? Is it pleasantry?
Oh, I see.
Like
I see.
Small talk. It wasn't just
surface. Wasn't shallow. Wasn't.
But that's still not the word I'm thinking of. So whatever.
The word you're thinking of might not even be a word yet.
That's right. Probably I'll make it up, but it'll come.
Okay. Kieran says you have to start again.